Europa, Estonia. Silja, Europa, Estonia. Silja, Europa, Viking, Estonia.
Estonia, Estonia.
Mayday, Mayday.
Estonia, Silja, Europa. Are you calling Mayday? Estonia, what's going on? Can you reply?
This is Estonia. Kuka se on siellä? Silja, Europa, Estonia.
Yes, Estonia, this is Silja, Europa.
Hyvää huomenta, puhutko sä suomea?
Joo, puhun suomea.
Joo, meillä on nyt tässä ongelma. On paha kallistuma oikealle puolelle. Uskon, että oli pari 30 astetta. Voisitko sä tulla apuun ja pyytää myös Viking Linein apun?
Joo, Viking Line on tässä perässä ja meni varmaan tietoon. Me voitko antaa sun position?
Siis meillä pätkitään, meillä on blackout ja emme saa nyt, mä en osaa sanoa sitä.
Okei, selvä, ryhdytään toimiin.
Silja, Europa, Estonia.
Joo, Estonia ja Silja, Europa.
Mä sanon sulle paikan nyt.
Joo, anna tulla.
59 latituutia, pieni hetki. 22 astetta.
Okei, 22 astetta, selvä, lähdetään sinne.
Elikkä siis 59 latituutia ja 22 minuuttia.
59, 22 minuuttia longituudi.
21.40 idästä.
21.40 itäistä, okei.
Todella pahalta näyttää se nyt tässä kyllä.
Joo, ja pahalta näyttää, me ollaan tulossa, ja se oli 21.40.
MS Estonia. MS Estonia sank on Wednesday 23rd September 1994 between about 0050 and 0150 as the ship was crossing the Baltic Sea en route from Tallinn, Estonia to Stockholm, Sweden. The sinking was one of the worst maritime disasters of the 20th century. It is one of the deadliest peacetime sinkings of a European ship after the Titanic in 1912 and the Empress of Ireland in 1914, and the deadliest peacetime shipwreck to have occurred in the European waters with 852 people out of 982 lives stated at the time as official law. Subsequent passenger list analysis suggests a likely higher figure, slightly behind schedule at 19:15 on 27 September, and was expected in Stockholm the next morning at about 9 a.m. She was afterwards stated as carrying 989 people, 803 passengers and 186 crew members. However, the actual numbers was likely higher. Subsequent analysis of the passenger list suggested 69 further unaccounted for passengers and so a possibly 921 dead. Most of the passengers were Swedish, although some were of Estonian origin. While most of the crew members were Estonian, the ship was fully loaded and was listing slightly to starboard because of a poor cargo distribution. According to the final disaster report, the weather was rough with a wind of 15 to 25 m/s, 29 to 49 kn, 34 to 56 miles per hour, force 7 to 10 on the Beaufort scale, and a significant wave height of 4 to 6 m, 13 to 20 feet, compared with the highest measured significant wave height in the Baltic Sea of 7.7 meters, 25 feet 3 inches. Isa Makela, the captain of the Silja Europa, who was appointed on scene commander for the subsequent rescue effort, described the weather as normally bad or likely a typical autumn storm in the Baltic Sea. According to the model satellite data, gusts were in the excess of 85 to 100 kilometers per hour at 1 a.m. that was night over the Baltic Sea. Although the ship had not yet reached the areas with the heaviest gusts before its sinking, there was some rain and temperature of about 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. All scheduled passengers ferries were at sea, something not unusual for this weather in the Baltic Sea. The official report says while the exact speed at the time of the accident is not known, Estonia had very regular voyage times, averaging 16 to 17 kn, which is almost 30 to 31 kilometers per hour. The chief mate of the Viking Line cruise ferry, Mariela, tracked Estonia's speed by radar at approximately 14.2 kn, 26.3 kilometers per hour before the first signs of distress, while the Silja Europa officers estimated her speed at 14 to 15 kn, 26 to 28 kilometers per hour at midnight. The first sign of trouble aboard Estonia was when a metallic bang was heard, presumably caused by a heavy wave hitting the board doors around 1 am when the ship was on the outskirts of Turku archipelago, but an inspection limited to checking the indicator lights for the ramp and visors showed no problems. Over the next 10 minutes, similar noises were reported by passengers and crew. At about 1:15, the visor is believed to have separated and torn open the loading ramp behind it. The ship immediately took a heavy starboard list, initially around 15 degrees, but at 1:30 am the ship had rolled 60 degrees, and by 1:50 the list was 90 degrees. As water flooded into the vehicle deck, Estonia was turned to port and shore before her four engines cut out completely. At about 1:20, a quiet female voice called, "Harry, Harry, Lival on Harry," Estonian for the alarm, alarm. There is alarm on the ship, or the public address system, which was followed immediately by an internal alarm for the crew, then 1 minute later by the general emergency signal. The vessel rapid list and the flooding prevented many people in the cabins from ascending to the boat deck, as water not only flooded the vessel via the car deck but also through windows in cabins as well as the massive windows along deck 6. The windows gave way to the powerful waves as the ship listed and the sea reached the upper decks. Survivors reported the water flowed down from ceilings, panels, stairwells, and along corridors from decks that were not yet underwater. This contributed to the rapid sinking. A mayday was communicated by the ship crew at 1:22, but did not follow international formats. Estonia directed a call to Silja Europa, and only after making contact with her did the radio operator utter the word Mayday. The radio operator on Silja Europa, Chief Mate Teijo Sepelin, replied in English, "Estonia, are you calling Mayday?" After that, the voice of the third mate, Andri Temes, took over on Estonia and the conversation shifted to Finnish. Thames was able to provide some details about the situation, but due to a loss of the power, he could not give on their position, which delayed rescue operations somewhat. Thames would later die in the sinking. Some minutes later, power returned on the bridge, managed to lower him or deck to the starboard side on the bridge to check the marine GPS, which will display the ship's position even in the blackout conditions. And the Estonia was able to radio its position to Silja, Europa, and Mariela. After that, Estonia sent the last radio message saying, "Todela, Paho, Todela, Pahalta, Nayata, Night, Tasala Kaila" in English. Really bad, it's looking really bad right now. The ship disappeared from the radar screens of the other ships at around 1:50 and sank at 59:23 Nautica and 21:41 in international waters, about 22 nmi 21 km on bearing 157 degrees from Uto Island, Finland, to a depth of 74 to 81 meter, 245 to 280 feet of water. According to survivors' account, the ship sank stern first after taking a list of 90 degrees. Rescue efforts, search and rescue, followed arrangements set up under the 1979 International Convention on Maritime Search and Rescue, the SAR Convention. The nearest Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, MRCC Turku, coordinated the effort in accordance with Finland plans. The Baltic is one of the world's busiest shipping area with 2,000 vessels at sea at any time, and these plans assumed the ship on boards and nearby ferries would provide immediate help and the helicopters could be airborne after an hour. This scheme had worked for the relatively small number of accidents involving sinkings, particularly as most ships have few people on board. Mariela, the first of the five ferries to reach the scene of the accident, arrived at 2:12. MRCC Turku failed to acknowledge the mayday immediately, and Mariela report was relayed by Helsinki radio as the less urgent pen message. A full-scale emergency was only declared at 2:30. Mariela winched open life rafts into the sea, onto which 13 people on Estonia's raft successfully transferred and reported the location of the other raft to Swedish and Finnish rescue helicopters, the first of which arrived at 3:05. The former took survivor to shore, while the latter Finnish border guard helicopters Super Puma OHHVG and Augusta Bell 412 OHHVD chose the riskier option of landing on the ferries. The pilot of OHHVG stated that landing on the ferries was the most difficult part of the whole rescue operations, despite that the single helicopter rescued 42 people more than all the ferries. MS Isabella 16 survivors with its rescue slide. On the 989 on board, 138 were rescued. One of the whom died later in the hospital. Ships rescued 34 and helicopters 104. The ferries played a much smaller part than the planners had intended because it was too dangerous to launch their men overboard boats or lifeboats. The accident claims 852 lives. Most died by drowning and hypothermia as the water temperature was 10 to minus 11 degrees Celsius. On the victims of the sinking was the Estonian Singan Armas Alander. In total, 94 bodies were recovered, 93 within 33 days of the accident, and the last victim was found 18 months later. By the time the rescue helicopters arrived, around a third of the who escaped from the Estonia had died of the hypothermia, while fewer than half of those who had managed to leave the ship were eventually rescued. The survivors of the shipwreck were mostly young males with strong constitutions. From all those who survived, one were men, but only 26 were women. 7 over 55 years of age survived, and were no survivors under age 12. About 650 people were still inside the ship when it sank. The Commission estimated that up to 310 passengers reached the outer decks, 160 of whom boarded the lifeboat. About the official investigation and report, the wreck was examined and videotaped by remotely operated underwater vehicles and by divers from a Norwegian company, Rockwater AS, contracted for the investigation work. The official report indicated that the locks on the bow door had failed from the strain of the waves, and the door had separated from the rest of the vessel, pulling the ramp behind it ajar. The bow visor and the ramp had been torn at points that would not trigger open or unlatched warnings on the bridge, as is the case in normal operations or failure of the latches. The bridge was also situated too far back on the ferry for the visor to be seen from there. While there was video monitoring of the inner ramp, the monitor on the bridge was not visible from the conning station. The bow visor was under-designed, and the ship manufacturing and approval processes did not consider the visor and its attachments as critical items regarding ship safety. The first metallic bang was believed to have been the sound of the visor lower locking mechanism failing, and the subsequent noises would have been from the visor flapping against the hull as the other locks failed, before tearing free and exposing the bow ramp. The subsequently failure of the bow ramp allotted water into the vehicle deck, which was identified as the main cause of the capsizing and sinking. Ro-ro ferries with their wide vehicle decks are particularly vulnerable to capsizing if the vehicle deck is even slightly flooded because of free surface effects. The fluid swelling motion across such a large area hampers the boat's ability to right itself after rolling with the wave. The same effect had caused the capsizing of MS Herald of the Free Enterprises 7 years earlier. The report was critical of the crew actions, particularly for failing to reduce speed before investigating the noises emanating from the bow, and for being unaware that the list was being caused by water entering the vehicle deck. There were also general criticism of the delays in sounding the alarm, the passivity of the crew, and the lack of guidance from the bridge. Recommendations for modifications to be applied to similar ships include separation of the condition sensors from the latch and hinge mechanisms. Now, the changes stemming from the disaster. In 1999, special training requirements in crowd and crisis management and human behavior were extended to crew on all passenger ships, and amendments were made to watch keeping standards. Estonia distress become as EPIRPs required manual activation, which did not happen. Had they been activated automatically, it would have been immediately obvious that the ship was in distress and the location would have been clear. All EPIRBs were subsequently required to deploy automatically, and the accident was instrumental in the move to legislate voice data records, new international marine organization, safety of life at sea, life routes, regulations for rescue from blasting ships, and rough water was introduced. New design. The Sidle concept, once again influenced by Estonia, aimed to ensure damaged ships have sufficient buoyancy to remain afloat, though cost will determine if any are built. SOLAS 90, which came into effect in 2010, specifies existing passenger ship stability requirements, and those in the northwest Europe must also be able to survive 50 centimeter, almost 20 inches of water on the car deck. On 20th September 2020, a Swedish documentary was released which used underwater equipment to film the wreck. This investigation found a 4-meter hole in the ship's hull that prompted the Estonian Prime Minister and Foreign Minister to meet with their Swedish and Finnish equivalents and announced that a new technical investigation would take place. The head of the Estonian investigation stated publicly that he believes this new information points to a collision with a submarine and that hole could not have happened post sinking. In October 2020, the Estonian government published a report stating that the hole was too small to have sunk the ship as quickly as it did. The Swedish documentary makers were prosecuted for violating the sanctity of the wreck, but were acquitted on 8 February 2021 as the diving happened on a German ship in international waters. Germany had not signed the treaty that declares sanctity over the site. However, as a result of a retrial in September 2020, the filmmakers were finally found guilty and fined. By June 2021, laws allowing the examination of the wreck for investigation of the disaster were passed in the Swedish and the Estonian parliament. Shortly after the Swedish Accident Investigation Authority announced a plan to conduct dives at the grave site starting July 2021. In July 2023, the car ramps were retrieved. Between 2021 and 2022, Estonian, Finnish, and Swedish authorities carried out comprehensive wreck surveys using cameras, 3D photogrammetry, 3D laser scanners, and shallow and mid penetration sub-bottom profilers among the equipments. This was to identify the cause of the penetrating deformation to the hull of the MV Estonia and the assess whether the safety investigation of the sinking should be reopened. In January 2023, the Swedish Accident Investigation Authority released the immediate report of the preliminary assessment of MS Estonia following the joint investigations. According to the report, there were no indication of a collision with a vessel or a floating object. Neither was there indication of an explosion in the bow area. Also, an oil leak was found on the hull's aft section, and that the Finnish border guard is monitoring the leakage. It was also concluded that the ship was not seaworthy and its certificate of seaworthiness issued 28 January 1993 was incorrect because an inspection of the bow parts following regulations which would have led to the discovery of the flaws in the visor was not performed, and the exemption regarding the location of the bow ramp as the upper extensions of the collision bulkheads was not recorded in the certificates. The report also concluded that if the inspection was performed and the exemption noted, the vessel would have been trading the Tallinn Stockholm route and the accident would probably not have occurred. The ramp would be lifted in 2023 July and parts that divers in the 1990 had cut to get into the ship. The disasters had a major impact on the ferry's safety, leading to changes in safety regulation as well as in life raft design, much as the RMS Titanic disaster did in 1912. Conspiracy theories exist about the cause of the sinking. German journalist Jutta Arabi and the British magazine New Statesman claim that the laboratory tests on the debris recovered illegal from Estonia yield trace evidence of the deliberate explosions which they allege was concealed by the Swedish, British, and the Russian governments to cover up an intelligence operation smuggling military hardware via the civilian ferry. Members of the Joint Action Investigation Commission denied this claim, saying that the damage seen on the debris occurred during the voyage detachment from the vessel. The JIS cited results from the German Federal Institute for Material Research and Testing, which found that due to Arabic symbols did not prove an explosion occurred. The transportation of the military equipment in the autumn of 2004, a former Swedish custom officer claimed on Sveriges television that Estonia had been used to transport former Soviet military equipment in 1994. The Swedish and the Estonian government subsequently launched separate investigations which both confirmed that non-explosive military equipment was aboard the ship on 14th and 20th September 1994. According to the Swedish Ministry of the Defense, no such equipment was on board on the day of the disaster, and the previous investigation by the Swedish Customs Service found no reports of any anomalous activity around the day of the disaster. In the aftermath of the disaster, many relatives of the deceased demanded that their loved be raised from international waters or given a land burial. Demands were also made that the entire ship be raised so that the cause of disaster could be discovered. But the detailed inspection, citing the practical difficulties and the moral implications of the raising the dying bodies from the sea floor, the majority of the bodies were never recovered. And fearing the financial burden of lifting the entire hull to the surface and the salvage operation, the Swedish government suggested burying the whole ship in situ with a shell of concrete. As a preliminary step, thousands of tons of pebbles were dropped on the site. The Estonia Agreement 1995 with treaty among Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Poland, Denmark, Russia, and the United Kingdom declares sanctity of the site, prohibiting their citizens from even approaching the wreck. The treaty is, however, only binding the citizens of the countries that are signatories. At least twice, the Swedish Navy had discovered diving operation at the wreck. The wreck location is monitored on radar by the Finnish Navy.